All right, so good morning, everybody. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. I know we've got a bunch of new faces in our live classroom groups today, as well as those joining on YouTube. So if you are joining for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And at no time is that more evident than May. May is our epic biodiversity month. And in addition to 40 plus programs, we are also doing our Backyard Bio Global Nature campaign. So if you haven't checked this out yet, backyardbio.net and hashtag backyardbio. It's your one way to get out with your kids virtually in person as a family, as a classroom, and go explore all the amazing local biodiversity near you, sharing it with other communities and groups around the world. So that's pretty exciting. And then the third weekend of May, we have our Global Biodiversity Festival. Over 150 programs in 3 days, the largest conservation festival of all time on this planet. So if you guys want to check that out with conservationists from all the continents over one epic weekend, check out globalbiofest.com and register there. So to keep that fun going, of course, and to really embody the effort of getting out to explore local biodiversity, we are joined by the amazing team at the Friends of the Rouge Watershed. We have done a bevy of programs with them over the last year, and it's always exciting to get to go through walks in the woods to learn a little bit about what lives close to home. So the Rouge Watershed is in the east end of Toronto, where I live personally. I'm so excited about this to get a chance to see some of these amazing wildflowers that are popping up in early May. So I hope you guys are as pumped as I am. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Tivia and the Friends of the Rouge Watershed team, and take us away, guys. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we'll be taking you on a virtual tour of the beautiful spring wildflowers that only bloom for a certain amount of time every single spring, right before the trees of the deciduous leaves emerge and shade out the forest floor. So yesterday was Mother's Day, so we just want to dedicate this virtual spring wildflower walk to all of our beloved mothers, grandmothers, caregivers, as well as Mother Nature. So today I will be joined by my colleagues. I'll be joined by Jim, Jessica, and David, who you'll see in a little bit, who will also introduce you to some beautiful spring wildflowers. My name is Tivia, and I am the Environmental Project Coordinator with Friends of the Rouge Watershed. So we all work for Friends of the Rouge Watershed, or FRW for short, which is a small charitable environmental organization that is based right here in the Rouge River Watershed and Rouge National Park near Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And since 1991, Friends of the Rouge Watershed has worked with hundreds of community partners, as well as 65,000 youth and school volunteers to help plant nearly 750,000 native trees, shrubs, and wildflowers to help Mother Nature restore almost 3.5 million square meters of biodiverse forest, wetland, and meadow habitat. So just before we begin, I would just like to pay respects to the Indigenous peoples that lived on and took care of this land for thousands of years. So we respectfully acknowledge that we are gathered upon the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. This territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in this community and on this territory. So just to give you an idea of some of the projects, I have a couple before and after photos that show the visible examples of forest and wetland and meadow restoration work that has been accomplished by Friends of the Rouge Watershed with the help of our partners and school and community volunteers. So this is an example of a wildflower meadow that was restored by student and community volunteers in 2009. And in just 3 short years, you can see that this meadow is now a diverse habitat for many pollinators like bees, butterflies, and birds. And here on the back is an example of forest restoration at Bob Hunter Memorial Park in Markham, Ontario. And this park was named after Bob Hunter, who was the co-founder of Greenpeace. And this forest restoration took place over 8 years. So this is the before photo from 2008, and just 8 short years later in 2016, you can see that a diverse and flourishing forest is thriving. And one of our favorite sites is the Beer Wetland in Rouge National Park. So the Beer Wetland is home to many different species, including turtles like the Blandings turtles, which is actually endangered, as well as amphibians, frogs, and newts, and mammals including river otter, beavers, and white-tailed deer. And this biodiverse network of wetlands was originally a barren soil pit, which was located next to a landfill or a garbage dump. And the soil was actually extracted from this pit to be placed on the garbage, and it was left devoid of any nature. So with the help of volunteers, we dug wetlands and we built a berm to plant on, and we planted thousands of native plants. This one here is another popular spot that Friends of the Rouge Watershed and volunteers helped to restore. This is the Rouge Wetland in Rouge Park. And this area used to be an agricultural field. And our general manager, Jim, noticed that there was a natural pooling of water occurring here and thought that this area might be a great place for a wetland. And he was definitely right, because with the help of Ducks Unlimited, Friends of the Rouge Watershed was able to plant thousands of native trees, shrubs, and wildflowers to create this beautiful wetland habitat. And you can see in the second picture just how lush and green this area has become. And the Rouge wetlands are now known as one of the top birding spots in all of Rouge Park. So all of these restored forests, wetlands, and meadows are very important because they help to absorb more water, carbon, and pollutants to reduce the costly impacts of climate change, flooding, and pollution, and they also produce the oxygen which we need to survive. Lastly, I have a map of the Rouge Park. And thanks to decades of environmental awareness and action by many groups dedicated to saving the Rouge, the Ontario government created a 40 square kilometer Rouge Park between 1990 and 2010. And this park was enlarged into a 79 square kilometer Rouge National Park by the federal government in 2015, which you can see in the purple color on the map. So now the Rouge Park stretches from Lake Ontario in the south all the way north into Uxbridge and Stouffville and the Oak Ridges Moraine, which is a glacial deposit which was formed by the last ice age. And Southern Ontario is Canada's most populous region, and Rouge National Park is the largest tract of public land in Southern Ontario. So Rouge Park is part of Canada's endangered Carolinian Forest Zone, which is a life zone which is home to more than 20% of Canada's endangered species. So now I will pass it on to Jim, who will start with our virtual spring wildflower walk.
Hi guys, nice to have you out here today. It's just a beautiful spring morning, a little bit chilly, but the sun's warming it up. If you look behind me, you can see the forest with just tiny little leaves on it. And the wildflowers that come out in the spring, they have a strategy because they live among giants. They're tiny little wildflowers that live amongst these big trees. And the trees grow so high that they can stop the sunlight from coming through when their leaves are fully expanded. So the little wildflowers, just after the ground warms up in April, they start to grow slowly and they come up through the old leaves. And by about the third week, fourth week of April, they sometimes even have some flowers. And they have to gather all the energy they can to do photosynthesis and to put energy back into their roots in order to be able to survive, because for 11 months of the year, there's not enough sunlight or it's too cold and they can't grow. So if you look up here, see all the little leaves, the little wildflowers that are on the forest floor are racing to gather sunlight before those leaves expand and put them in the shade. So these are called, some people call them vernal wildflowers because vernal is another word for spring, but we'll just call them spring wildflowers. Now what we're going to do, we're going to take you through a little walk in the forest. You might hear the woodpeckers tapping on the tree behind us. You might hear some of the beautiful warblers and spring birds returning to breed. And I'm going to point out a few of the wildflowers, and I'll talk about some of them, and a few of my friends with Friends of the Rouge will talk about other ones. So let's start our walk, okay? So the first wildflower we're going to look at is kind of our provincial emblem. It's called the white trillium. And if you notice, it has 3 leaves and 3 white petals. And you're not supposed to pick trilliums, but Native people actually had remedies they used for trilliums, like to help them if they were sick or things like that. Aren't they pretty? They're just gorgeous with those 3 white petals. And sometimes there's a bacteria or virus that can get into the trilliums, and their leaves will actually have green streaks in them. Now, in Ontario, there's probably about 4 or 5 varieties of trillium. We'll see the red trillium later today. It looks very similar, but red petals. There's a painted trillium that actually has white petals, but it has beautiful pink and red streaks in them, sort of lines. And there's a nodding trillium. And as its name says, its kind of flower sort of hangs with its head down. It's nodding. So that's our beautiful white trillium. Now over here, we have a plant that isn't flowering yet. So David's going to take a shot of the leaf. It's called water leaf. Now you should never eat things in the wild that you don't know what they are. But this particular one, Native people used it to make a salad. But never eat things in nature, because some of the things in the forest are deadly poisonous. You could really get sick. So David's going to take a picture now of what the water leaf flower would look like. It'll be in bloom in a little while. And you can see it has little white petals and it has long white stamens. The stamens are those long sort of little things that are sticking out the end. And that's called water leaf. This little plant is called twisted stalk. And you can see how the stalk is a little bit, it twists. And it's not in flower yet, but if it were, it has a little bell-shaped flower, cream or white bell-shaped flower that comes out where the leaf joins the stem. And this is twisted stalk, and it's really pretty. When the flowers and it gets a little red berry at each of the little spots where the leaf joins the stem. That's twisted stalk. David, if you can just pan there now. Now this is lily of the valley. It has the most beautiful fragrant flowers that come out on it. And this is the way lily of the valley looks when it's in bloom. It'll be in bloom in another couple weeks. It's just gorgeous. And it smells so pretty. And the leaves are beautiful and shiny. So that's lily of the valley. I'm going to go a little further now. This is a steep slope, so we'll have to be careful here. Look at the beautiful river behind us and the water. At this time of year, the rainbow trout are actually coming up the river to spawn. And they have kind of a beautiful greenish and reddish patch on their side that's kind of a little bit like a rainbow. That's why they're called rainbow trout. So they'll be making their way up the river in the fall. The salmon come up the river. Here's another example of the twisted stalk. That's the one that eventually will have these little cream flowers come out where the leaf joins the stem, and eventually they'll turn into a beautiful red berry. It's a very fragile little plant, but so beautiful. Twisted stalk. Now, everybody I'll bet knows this flower. When I was young, we used to put it up against our chin, and if your chin went yellow, they'd say you like butter. I don't know why that's saying. It's a little kid's game, But this is actually not a native spring flower to Ontario. It's introduced, and people don't like it in their gardens. But I saw a wonderful story today about leave the dandelions and don't spray them and don't put nasty chemicals on them, because they're actually amazing habitat for bees, and they're one of the first flowers in the city that comes out that the bees can use. So this is called dandelion, as you know. Now, David, I'll get you to come over here. This one doesn't have a flower, but look at the leaves. See the leaves? Now, the interesting thing about dandelion is it's actually a sort of somebody who couldn't pronounce French. I'm not very good at my French either. But in French, the French called this dent de lion, which, if you know your French, means teeth of the lion, dent de lion. And if you look at that, it kind of looks like lion's teeth big, right? So the British didn't pronounce it right, and they called it dandelion, but it's actually dent de lion. Not a native wildflower, but something, if you can tolerate it in your lawns, it's actually good for bees. So this little flower is a purple violet. You really have to get in close to appreciate them. They have a little bit of yellow, a little bit of white. They're so pretty, and they have a heart-shaped leaf. Some of these, all of these flowers are very delicate, and you want to stay on the forest paths, because when you step off the path, you could actually be stepping on the head of one of these flowers, because often they're sort of just growing up amongst the leaves, and it's hard to see them. And David, if you can just pan over here, there's a yellow violet over there. Beautiful yellow violet. Very tiny flowers. They're not any bigger than probably your thumbnail or your fingernail, but very pretty violet. Blue and purple one, and the yellow. This is yours. So this beautiful flower is trout lily, and David's going to tell you a little bit about it.
Yeah, so the trout lily is identified by the coloration on the leaf there, and that's how it actually gets its name, because it looks a lot like brook trout, the coloration on it. Now, trout lily is a colony plant. You're going to find a bunch of them together, and they can be up to 200 to 300 years old in some cases. And they also rely on ants to kind of increase that colony and spread it around. Ants will eat the seed, or part of the seed, which helps it germinate. And that's just a little taste of the ecosystem working together.
So this is a fern, not really a wildflower, but these come up in the spring. You don't really want to pick them, but some people do. If you're outside the city in a rural area where there's not much pressure on them, some people pick them when they're all curled up and kind of like a snail, and they call them fiddleheads. But again, you have to be very careful. These ferns, they do have some things in it that will make you sick. They're called carcinogens. And so you want to be very careful. This is ostrich fern. I guess they called it that because the leaves, when they're coming out with that curvature, probably look a little bit like the feathers of an ostrich. It's ostrich fern. Jesse, I just wanted to do a sound check. How's our sound?
Oh, your sound is fantastic. And by the way, as you're walking, I've never heard the Dent de Leon thing, and I've been here my entire life. So this is really exciting for me, and the feedback's been tremendous. So keep it up, man. This is great.
If you look at this little fern, it has a red stem. And some people call this lady fern. Some people call it lady in red. But it will grow a little bit much bigger than this over time. But it starts off with this beautiful red stem. And if you look at how delicate the leaves are, and the interesting thing is the way the fern leaves come out, and spread and divide. There's actually a mathematical formula that shows how this happens. It's quite amazing how nature has mathematics is a part of and why things grow the way they do. Oh, David, that's a really nice trout lily leaf with the modeling.
Yeah, right there.
So that's a trout lily leaf. You could see the modeling of it. It looks a little bit like the greenish and reddish brown of a trout, like a brook trout, like David was saying. Here's another beautiful white trillium. So we'll do some repeats so that you get to know them. Look at those 3 white petals and those 3 green leaves. Trillium. Tri is a word for 3. I don't know if it's Latin or Greek, but tri means 3. So trillium, that's how it gets its name. Some of these, it's been a bit cold. It's been a bit cold, so some of these don't have their flowers yet. This one's called blue colehush. Native people knew all of these plants and they used them for remedies and that. This one was used for childbirth. It's called blue colehush. It had other uses too, but it is poisonous, so you definitely don't want to be eating it. Native people prepared things in certain ways. Sometimes they dry them for a long time, sometimes they bake them, and by doing that, sometimes that removes some of the poisons. But you should never eat things out in the wild like this because some of them are not safe. Maybe if I miss any, you can. Maybe if I miss any, you can remind me. We put out little markers. We went out earlier this morning, put out little markers so we'd remember where they were. And now we've got to pick the markers up. We don't want to litter. Look at this beautiful white pine tree. This is a tree that can live to be 350, 400 years old. If you go to Northern Ontario in a place called Temagami, it's about an hour from North Bay, you can find trees like this that are almost 2 meters in diameter and are 400 years old, and they're probably 16-story apartment high, so about 30 meters, 35 meters. They're one of our beautiful long-lived native trees, eastern white pine. You can see the deep furrowed bark, and up top you can see the beautiful green needles. The needles have 5, they're in bundles, just like the word white has 5 letters. The needles in white pine, they're in bundles of 5. This is another twisted stalk. You can see how the stalk has a little zigzag to it. And in about another 2 weeks, there'll be tiny little, like a little thread coming down with a little cream or whitish bell-shaped flower. It looks like a little bell, very pretty. And then they have the red berry comes out over time. And in August, you'll see the red berry. Look at the beautiful lady ferns, lady in red, lady ferns, and this beautiful white cedar, eastern white cedar. Aren't they gorgeous? Hey, look at the texture on the bark and the beauty. This is probably a 120-year-old, 140-year-old tree.
This is quite the journey, guys. We're doing like the whole forest. This is amazing.
Yeah, so for a little while now, we might not see many flowers, so you can enjoy the walk. You'll notice now we're going from a deciduous. Deciduous forests are the ones that lose their leaves. They have broad leaves like maple leaves and oak leaves. And in the fall, they lose their leaves because it's going into the frozen season and their leaves couldn't survive that. Coniferous trees like the pine and the cedar and the spruce, they can take the cold, so they keep their needles on, and they're much older species. They go back, I don't know, probably 100 million years, whereas the deciduous are a little bit younger. I don't mean that individual trees are that old, but the species. So we'll be walking through the cool, shaded part of a coniferous forest, which is the pines and the cedars. And because the light doesn't get through there, even in the springtime, you'll notice there's very little growing on the ground because all plants need light. Oh, no, Jessica's going to do this one. This is a beautiful plant called bloodroot. And it lost its beautiful white, gorgeous white petals, but it's lost them now. But Jessica might be able to show you in a book. Take it away, yep. Jessica.
Okay, hi everybody. So this is bloodroot. Each flower has only one leaf. It's a large leaf like this. And when the flower emerges, the leaf is holding it, and then the flower opens up and the leaf also rolls out. It's called bloodroot because the roots are really red. You can kind of see the redness, but underground they're even more red, and it looks like blood. Even their Latin name, which is sanguinaria, it comes from Latin sanguis, which means blood. And here's a picture of them when they are open here. So they have a really pretty white flower with a yellow middle, and indigenous people use them, the root, to dye things. They could use it to dye leather or textiles, and they also used it to paint themselves. And it's said that it's also used to treat to induce vomiting because it's actually toxic or a little bit poisonous. So you don't want to touch it because it could give you a rash. But it also induces vomiting, and yeah, it's used not so much anymore, but also rumored to use to treat plaque. It's in a few plaque treating ingredients, but don't eat it if you go in the forest. It's toxic, and don't touch it because it can cause a rash, kind of like poison ivy.
So we're going into the darkness of the coniferous forest now, and you'll see not many wildflowers for a bit. David, did you recognize that bird?
Yeah, that was a black and white warbler. I don't know if you guys could hear it.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It's been so nice hearing the bird calls in the background of the whole presentation. It was so neat. Thanks, David.
Yeah, no worries.
This is another bloodroot, guys. What's really neat, the leaf is looks a little bit like a fig leaf in shape. And when that flower is there, the petals are so delicate and fragile, the leaf kind of curls around and protects them, because as soon as you get a big wind, the petals all fall off. Here's another beautiful blue violet. Here's a yellow violet again. Here's a blue violet actually that's a little more You can see it's out. It's unfurled its petals a bit more. Here's a plant right here. It has little white flowers. It's called toothwort. And I guess maybe people believed at some time that maybe this was good for helping your teeth or something like that, if there was something wrong with your gums. And David, I see the start of a little tiny, just a little tiny start of the bellflower, the bell-shaped flower of the twisted stalk. It hasn't come out yet, but you could just see the little white bud of it there. Now, this is one we don't want to see. This is an invasive species from Europe. It's called garlic mustard. Now, people do actually make a pesto out of it, but you have to watch because it does have some things in it that are toxic if you eat too many. But it unfortunately spreads in the forest, and it gives off a chemical that hurts the little wildflowers in the trees and the soil. So we really don't want that to be around too much. You should not pick things in the forest much, but I'm actually going to pull these out because they are really invasive. At this time of year, they come out fairly easily by the roots, and you see the leaves. And if you were here with us, you could smell it. It smells a bit like garlic and onions. So it doesn't smell bad, but it's bad for the forest. It's not native to here. Tivia, your wild ginger's coming up.
Just so you guys know, for time-wise, we've got about 3 more minutes if you guys want to show us a few more things, and then I'd love to dive in with Q&A. We're already starting to get some on YouTube, and I know we've got our live groups, but you guys definitely have the all-time record for the most ground covered in any Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants presentation in our, 7-year history, so way to go.
Show you the wild ginger.
Yeah, so this is wild ginger, and you can identify it by its beautiful heart-shaped green leaves. And in perfect conditions, wild ginger can actually be expected to live to about 10 years, which is pretty cool. And the flowers of wild ginger are actually located right at the bottom of the plant, right underneath the leaves at ground level. And the flowers are a beautiful reddish brown color. And a cool story about wild ginger is that the flowers actually evolved to attract pollinating flies, ants, and beetles. So when they lie on the ground like this, it's very easy for them to crawl in and pollinate the plants. So when they crawl in, they actually have a little bit of pollen that gets attached to their bodies. So when they move to the next flower, they carry that pollen with them and help to spread the seeds of the wild ginger.
And Tivia, they smell bad too. They kind of smell like dead animals, so that attracts the beetles and the ants in, is that they have a bad smell to them, but they're very beautiful. Guys, this is a black cherry tree with its cornflake. It looks like big, huge potato chips, black potato chips or cornflakes. Black cherry, beautiful tree. We're almost there, Jesse.
No worries, guys. This is amazing. What a stunning woodland and what a beautiful day for this hike. That we've never had more people write "wow" in a chat bar than we have for this. This has been really special.
These aren't out yet. This is actually a wild currant or in the forest. Oh, there's a tiny little start. They'll have little berries on them. Not very descriptive. But all these plants have a strategy, and that's they need sunlight to manufacture sugars and resources. And so they have to come out just before the leaves come on. Otherwise, it'll be shady and they won't have enough sunlight to live. Jesse, do you want to start the questions about here?
Yeah, if that works for you guys, I'd love to do that. What I'll do is I'll give our live class just a second to get their thinking caps on and prep for their question. And I'll share one from Miss Doyle's class. Rodrigo in Miss Doyle's class wants to know, what's the lifespan of some of these plants? We've got the chance to see so many different things today, so I know it's going to differ, but how long are they living?
Well, as David said, the trout lilies live in these colonies. That some of them can be hundreds of years old. And I'm not sure about trilliums and that, but most of these have either a bulb, so they're like a tulip. They have a tiny little bulb that they replenish with the sugar they make from the sun and photosynthesis. So the individual plants, I think probably some of these trilliums, if they're not picked by people or things like that, probably 10, 20 years or more.
That is...
I've got ones in my backyard from rescued from a development site that I put in 20, 25 years ago, and they're still going strong.
Wow, how about that? How cool. Thanks, guys. And great first question from Rodrigo. Miss Crawford's class, they're joining us in Brockville, Ontario. If you guys want to come on in, go for it with a question. Hi, Miss Crawford.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're perfect.
Okay, great. I don't know if anybody has a question yet. You might want to move on to somebody else just yet.
That's okay. I'll come back in just a second. We'll head to Miss Tran's class. Miss Tran's group is joining us in Toronto, down the road from us both. Come on in, guys.
Hi, Jesse.
Hi.
So we have 2 questions here. Is that okay for 2?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, we have from our grade 3 class. Why are the trees so skinny, and why is the ginger flower fuzzy?
Nice.
Okay, the trees are skinny because a lot of this area was deforested. In southern Ontario, more than 80% of the forest cover was removed when the colonists came here and took over from the native people. The native people protected the natural forest. When the forests were here, the water was so clean you could drink from the river, and it was just full of fish that we could eat. But we've removed too much forest cover, and we need to put some back for the sake of our water quality, our air quality, and our climate. So the reason the trees are skinny is because we cut down so many of them. There's only a few of the big old ones left. Now, in terms of the fuzziness, a lot of plants have fuzz on them so that when the bee comes into them to get the nectar, he actually leaves a bit of pollen. It brushes off, and that pollen is how trees or plants, and flowers, they fertilize themselves. So the bee travels to one plant, picks up pollen on his legs, goes to another one, and then that helps the next plant make seeds. It fertilizes, it pollinates the seeds, which allows them to grow.
Thanks, Ms. Tran. Great questions. Let's go to Miss Sargella's class, also in Toronto, our Grey Owl Junior Public School folks. Come on in, guys.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we're perfect.
Okay, Chara, would you like to ask your question?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Are we allowed to pick flowers from the forest?
No, you shouldn't. A lot of these flowers, if you pick them, they might die because they need to get the energy back from their leaves to go back down to the roots. So the best thing to do is take your cell phone or just use your memory. So I get down on my knees and I look at them and I make a mental memory of it. Sometimes I take a picture of it, and so I can have something, but you're better not to pick them. In the forest in particular, they're very sensitive. The ones that grow in your garden and some of the ones that they use it for florists and things like that, they're specially grown for that. So they're a little hardier. These flowers are very sensitive.
I'm really, really glad we got that question. I think it's so important for kids to know that you guys can go to garden centers. You can get flowers for your garden. You can get them that way. It's a really nice way to enjoy them at your own home, but we should leave the ones in the forest. One thing that we, of course, got the chance to see today is that Jim and the Friends of the Rouge team are really knowledgeable about all the plants of the forest. Not all of us have that expertise, and so one thing that you guys can do with your phones or with your families or teachers is use the iNaturalist or Seek apps. If you use these and you take a picture of those plants in the woods that you don't know what they are, the app will tell you what it is and show you all the areas in the world wherever a picture's been taken of it. So it's a really cool way of taking part. It's something we're using for our backyard bio campaign as well. All right, Ms. Lawrence's class, our oldest kids today, are Savvy Sixes. If you guys want to unmute your mic, come on in. Hi, guys.
I am here. Surprisingly, we don't have any questions today, except for one question. Oh, sorry. 1 second.
Take your time, no worries.
Okay, well, lots of comments that they don't want this presentation to end. It's very good. So the question is, how many flowers are there in the world?
Yeah. No pressure.
Yeah. I can tell you that in the Rouge, we have over 1,700 species of plants and animals and birds and things. I honestly don't know how many plants there are in the world. I would say spring wildflowers in the Rouge here, we probably have at least 50, maybe 100 that actually flower.
It's a good run. We'll try and consult Google through the presentation to see if we can get you a number of all the flowers in the whole world. But I love the question, and I'm glad you guys don't want it to end. That is the point. Let's take a few quick questions from YouTube, and then we'll go to Miss Denoff and Miss Crawford to wrap us up. So Chris Williams wanted to know, for David, how did you know that was a black and white warbler? You just identified that so quickly.
Practice.
Good answer. So yeah, another thing actually with iNaturalist, one thing that's kind of neat with it is if you just record the call of a bird, it will also tell you what it is. You don't even need to see it. If you record the call, the app is so cool that it's able to identify that based on the algorithm and based on the, again, expertise of people like David who know these calls and can help identify them on the app. So check that out. Let's see. We've got a lot of questions about poisonous plants. How do they give you a rash? So Anthony and Miss Blandstad, she wants to know, what kind of plant gives you a rash, and how do you know if it gives you a rash?
Oh, I get at you. You asked the right person. If you look at my finger, ivy on my finger. So at this time of year, poison ivy is just coming out, and there's a little rhyme that people use. They say, "Leaves of three, let me be." So poison ivy, when it first comes out, the leaves are shiny green with a little bit of radish in them, in groups of three, almost like the trillium, only they're a little shrub. And about half of people, maybe a little bit more, when they get the chemical from the leaves on their skin, it causes a red blistering, and it usually occurs in a little bit of a line. And you can see I've got a little bit of medication on it to try to dry it up. I actually didn't have any calamine lotion, so I used a bit of toothpaste, and it actually worked. But so poison ivy is one of them. There are quite a few plants like junipers, which are an evergreen, that have little prickly needles. Those things, if they touch your skin, some people get, what do they call it? It's a skin sort of rash from that.
Yeah.
Eczema or whatever. So there are a number of species of plants, but we're lucky. Here in Canada, there's much fewer. In some parts of the world, there are more dangerous things.
Yeah. Great question, guys. And again, that's been one of our biggest ones on YouTube. So if you want to find out more about native plants, the Toronto City Parks Department has an amazing biodiversity series. So look up biodiversity series, City of Toronto. It extends, of course, beyond Toronto. If you live close by in the general Toronto area, it'll apply to you. You can find out more about some of the plants and all the other types of organisms that live nearby. Guys, I wish we could go all day. We've got time for two more questions. Miss Danoff's class, also in Toronto. We got a lot of Toronto love today. We want to have people that can watch this presentation and go out to the parks themselves. So if you want to unmute your mic, Miss Danoff, and come on in with your tremendous twos, go for it.
Perfect, thank you. We were actually, my family and I aren't far. We were in the Rouge Park on the weekend.
Nice.
We have two questions. One is, if we are out in the park, how can we identify any of those plants that might be poisonous or itchy that we don't want to touch? And another one is if there's a lot of litter found in the park that might be dangerous to the animals.
Yeah.
Or the plants.
Yes, unfortunately, some people are littering. One thing you can do, I try to do it, is take a little bag along with you and just help out by picking up a few things as you go on your walk, and you've given something back to Mother Nature for the enjoyment you've had on that walk. I think Jesse was just giving you an app where you can look and take a picture of a plant and it'll pull it up. The main one that I think of in the Rouge for the most one you have to watch is the poison ivy. And if you stay on the trail, you're safer, because usually poison ivy likes a bit of sunlight. So it usually grows near trails, but a little bit off to the edge of them. So if you stay on the trail, you're safer with poison ivy. Again, leaves of three, let me be.
Fantastic, guys. Miss Denoff, I hope you get out to the park again soon and can identify those plants now with your kids. Miss Crawford, back to Brockville. Wrap us up with one more question, and hopefully you guys have one now.
Yes, we do. We have by that time I had time for a whole bunch of questions. I guess the two most important ones were, somebody wants to know, are most of the plants in the park that are flowering, are they edible? And the second one was a big question. Why is the forest so important to the water?
Well, some of the plants are edible, but some of them are just plain poisonous. So you better not eat them. If you're with an expert and you're not near the city, we don't want to pick plants or eat them because there's just so many people. Like someone called me this morning and said there were people out with big garbage bags taking away the fiddleheads, the ostrich ferns. And sadly, when you cut off the tops of the ostrich fern, it really weakens them, and over time they'll disappear. So we don't want to, eating things is okay if you have an expert with you away from the city, but not near the city. In terms of how forests purify water, forests are always purifying your air by taking in carbon dioxide and giving off oxygen through photosynthesis, but their roots take water, instead of it running across the ground and picking up dirt and bacteria and flushing it into our rivers and into our lakes where we get our drinking water, they channel the water underground where it spends decades, sometimes even centuries, slowly moving through sandy deposits. And with that movement, it gets cool and it gets clean. And in fact, sewage or water treatment plants actually use beds of sand to actually filter our water. So nature does that freely for us. And in fact, many parts of the world, including New York City and Geneva and Switzerland, they actually protect large areas, and then they collect a bit of that water and they put it in a pipe and they bring it. And so New York City has pretty good quality water because in upstate New York, they've protected an area, a couple hundred square kilometers, where there's a lot of forests, and the forests are naturally purifying that water. So they don't have to build an expensive treatment plant.
I'm so glad we got that question. So thank you so much for that, Ms. Crawford. Literally yesterday, I was watching A Perfect Planet, one of the newest BBC series, and they talked about something called the Great Green Wall. I encourage all our classes to check this out. This is in Africa, just to the south of the Sahara, and it's a project to plant millions and millions of trees to try and retain that water, to provide food, to provide habitat for wildlife, to stop the encroachment of the Sahara. So really, really cool thing, and sort of touches upon the themes that we got a chance to share today. Jim, this has been so much great. Tivia, David, Jessica, thank you guys so much. What I want to do now is just share a few quick links for people to check out more. So again, friendsoftherouge.ca if you want to learn more about this amazing organization. Check out their other programs on our YouTube channel. And if you want to see more programs of them coming in the future, exploringbytheseat.com is where all our things go on our newsletter. And of course, if you want to get out yourselves, check out backyardbio.net, our big campaign all month long. Jim, is there any last message you want to leave us with before we wrap up and say goodbye with all our teachers today?
I hope everybody had a good time today. It's nice that we could bring you out to the Rouge virtually. And Jesse, thank you for great programming as usual.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. And as you know, what we do at the end of every broadcast for our teachers that are fairly new to this, Miss Crawford, Miss Tran, Miss Sarzella, Miss Lawrence, and Miss Denoff, if you guys want to join me in saying a big thank you and goodbye to Jim and the team